Have you ever felt your blood boil while stuck in a metal tube at 30,000 feet? Imagine sitting on a sweltering runway for hours watching your child suffer, only to be told that a cup of water is against company policy. That's exactly what happened to David Carter and his 10-year-old son, Leo. But the flight attendant, Patricia, made a fatal error. She didn't look at the contact list on David's phone. She didn't know that one simple text message sent in silence was about to ground an entire fleet, end her career, and expose a scandal that the airline tried to bury. This is the story of the water bottle that cost $1 billion. The cabin of Flight 402, sitting idle on the tarmac of Charlotte Douglas International Airport, felt less like a commercial airliner and more like a convection oven. The air conditioning had been sputtering for the last 40 minutes, pushing out nothing but lukewarm recycled breath that smelled faintly of jet fuel and stale coffee. David Carter wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, but his own discomfort was the least of his worries. His eyes were locked on his 10-year-old son Leo, sitting in the window seat, 12A. Leo wasn't like other kids. While other 10-year-olds were complaining about their iPads running out of battery, Leo was fighting a silent internal war. He had sickle cell anemia. It was a cruel genetic lottery that meant his red blood cells could turn rigid and sticky, clogging blood flow and causing excruciating pain crises if he became dehydrated or stressed. And right now the environment was perfect for a crisis. "Dad," Leo whispered, his voice sounding like sandpaper rubbing together. "It's hot." David placed the back of his hand against Leo's cheek. It was burning. The boy's skin, usually a rich, vibrant tone, looked ashy and dry. His lips were chapped. "I know, buddy. I know." David soothed, though his own heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He checked his watch. They had been sitting on the tarmac for 1 hour and 15 minutes. The captain had mumbled something about a maintenance light and ground hold, but the updates had stopped 20 minutes ago. David reached down to his carry-on bag under the seat in front of him. He groped for the water bottle he always packed the lifeline. His fingers brushed only the nylon lining. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in his chest. The security checkpoint. He remembered now. The TSA agent, a harried man with no patience, had made him dump the heavy hydro flask because it was over the liquid limit, and in the rush to get to the gate before it closed, David hadn't had time to buy a frantic, overpriced bottle at the Hudson News. "I'll just ask the flight attendant," David had thought. "It's never a problem." He looked up. The flight attendants were huddled in the galley at the front, chatting and laughing. The fasten seatbelt sign was illuminated, glowing like a warning beacon. David pressed the call button. Ding! A minute passed, then 2. The laughter from the galley got louder. One of the attendants, a woman with hair sprayed into a rigid helmet of blonde curls and a name tag that read, Patricia. Senior crew glanced down the aisle. She saw the light. She saw David's raised hand. She turned her back. David felt a flash of irritation, but he tamped it down. He couldn't afford a scene. He just needed water. He unbuckled his seatbelt. "Sir!" The voice cracked like a whip. Patricia had spun around the moment she heard the click of the buckle. She marched down the aisle, her heels clicking aggressively on the thin carpet. "Sit down," she commanded, not asking but ordering. "The seatbelt sign is on. We are on an active taxiway." "We haven't moved in 40 minutes, David said, keeping his voice calm, pleading. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to disturb you, but I need some water. Immediately." Patricia stopped at row 12, looking down her nose at him. She was chewing gum, a violation of protocol, snapping it loudly. "Service hasn't started yet. We have to be airborne." I understand that, David said, leaning in so the other passengers wouldn't hear the desperation in his voice. But I don't need full service, just a cup of water. My son, he gestured to Leo, who was slumped against the window, eyes half closed. He has a medical condition. It's sickle cell. The heat is triggering him. He needs hydration now to stop a pain crisis. Patricia glanced at Leo. For a second, David thought he saw a flicker of humanity. But then she looked back at David, her eyes narrowing. She didn't see a worried father and a sick child. She saw an interruption to her break. She saw a man she felt she could bully. "Sir, if I give you water, I have to give everyone water," she said, her voice dripping with bureaucratic condescension. "And I am not opening the carts until the captain turns off the sign. Sit down and buckle up, or you will be removed." "This isn't about thirst," David insisted, his voice hardening slightly. "This is medical. Do you want a medical emergency on your hands? Don't threaten me," Patricia snapped. "I've been flying for 20 years. I know a sick kid when I see one. He looks tired. We're all tired. Sit down." She turned on her heel and walked away. David sat stunned. The passenger in 12C, an older woman named Mrs. Higgins, looked at him with wide, sympathetic eyes. "That was awful," she whispered. "Here I have a mint." "Thank you," David muttered, "but he needs fluids." Leo let out a small whimper. He clutched his left arm. "Dad, my arm hurts." The crisis was starting. The blood was thickening, clogging the tiny vessels in his joints. The pain of a sickle cell crisis has been described as having glass shards flowing through your veins. David didn't care about the rules anymore. The atmosphere in the plane shifted. It wasn't just hot anymore. It was hostile. David stood up again. This time, he didn't just stand. He stepped into the aisle. He walked toward the galley, his movement attracting the eyes of every bored and irritable passenger in the forward cabin. "Sir, I told you to sit down," Patricia shouted from the front, dropping a magazine she had been reading. "I need water for my son," David said, his voice projecting clearly through the cabin. "He is in pain. I am not asking for a soda. I am not asking for pretzels. I am asking for tap water. Now!" Patricia stormed toward him, blocking his path at row 4. She was shorter than him, but she used her authority like a riot shield. "You are violating federal aviation regulations. You are interfering with a flight crew member. Do you want to go to jail today?" "I want my son to live," David yelled, his composure cracking. "He has sickle cell." "Do you know what that is? He is dehydrating in this oven. You call a plane." "Sir, return to your seat or I will have the pilot call the police." Patricia hissed, her face inches from his. "You are being aggressive. You are scaring the passengers." "He's not scaring me," a voice shouted from the back. It was a man in a military t-shirt. "Give the kid some water, lady. It's 90 degrees in here." "Yeah, come on," another passenger yelled. "Just give him a bottle." Patricia's face turned a mottled shade of red. She felt her control slipping, and she reacted the only way a tyrant knows how, by doubling down. She grabbed the interphone handset hanging on the wall. "Captain, we have a level 2 disturbance in the cabin," she said loudly, making sure David heard every word. "Row 12, aggressive male passenger refusing instructions, threatening the crew. I need law enforcement at the gate. We are not taking off with him." She hung up and smirked at David, a cruel, victorious smirk. "There. Now nobody is going anywhere until you and your brat are escorted off. Are you happy?" David looked at her. He really looked at her. He saw the name tag again. Patricia. He memorized it. He didn't shout. He didn't scream. A strange, icy calm washed over him. He realized that arguing with her was like trying to reason with a storm. She wasn't listening. She was just blowing hard. He turned around and walked back to his seat. "That's right. Walk away," Patricia jeered behind him. "Sit down and shut up." David sat down. Leo was crying softly now, curled into a ball. "Dad, it hurts. It really hurts." "I know, Leo. I'm going to fix it," David whispered. "Hold on. Just 5 minutes." David reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The signal was weak, just 2 bars of LTE, but it was enough. Most people on the plane assumed David was just a quiet, middle-class dad. Maybe an accountant or a teacher. He dressed simply, a polo shirt and jeans. They didn't know that David had spent 15 years working as a logistics contractor for major aerospace firms. They didn't know that David's college roommate and best friend was Captain Robert "Bob" Sullivan. And they certainly didn't know that Captain Sullivan wasn't just a pilot. He was the regional director of flight operations for the very airline they were sitting on. He was the man who signed the checks, approved the schedules, and managed the discipline for every crew member on the East Coast. David opened his text messages. He bypassed the group chat with his fantasy football league and clicked on the thread pinned at the top, Bob Skyway Ops. His thumbs flew across the screen. "David Bob, are you at the Ops Center in Dallas?" 3 dots appeared instantly. The reply came in 10 seconds. "Bob. Yeah, watching the board. Why? Thought you were flying out to see your mum today." David typed, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a cold, hard rage. "David, I am. Flight 402 out of CLT. We've been on the tarmac for 90 mins. No AC. Leo is going into a sickle cell crisis. Needs water. FA named Patricia refuses to serve. Just called cops on me for begging for a cup. She says I'm a threat." He hit send. He watched the screen. "Bob." She denied Leo water. "David." "Yes." Said it's policy. "Leo is crying in pain." "Bob." There was a pause, a long 30-second pause where nothing happened. David wiped Leo's forehead again. Then a text came through. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "Bob, do not engage her again. Stay in your seat. Watch the cockpit door." David put the phone down on his lap. He looked at Mrs. Higgins next to him. "Is he okay?" she asked, gesturing to the phone. "He's handling it," David said softly. "Who will—" "Calmer," David said. Up in the front galley, Patricia was venting to a junior flight attendant named Sarah. "Can you believe that guy? Medical condition. Please." They always use that excuse to get free service before takeoff. "I'm going to make sure he's banned. I've already flagged his seat number." "But the kid did look sick, Pat," Sarah said timidly. "Don't be soft, Sarah. Give them an inch, they take the whole plane." Patricia scoffed. She checked her reflection in the metal of the coffee maker. "The police will be here in 10 minutes. I hope they drag him out." She had no idea that 4,000 miles away, in a glass-walled command center in Dallas, a man in a suit had just stood up from his desk, his face thunderous, and shouted a command that silenced the entire room. "Get me the tower at Charlotte, and patch me directly into the cockpit of Skyway 402, now." The dominoes were about to fall, and they were going to fall hard. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the thick, humid air of the cabin. To Patricia, it was the sound of victory. To the passengers of Flight 402, It was the sound of a ruined afternoon. But to David, listening to the shallow, ragged breathing of his son, it was just background noise. "Dad." Leo gasped, his small hands gripping the armrests so hard his knuckles turned white. "My legs, they feel like they're breaking." David unbuckled his seatbelt again, ignoring the glare from Mrs. Higgins, who looked terrified. He knelt on the floor of the plane, disregarding the grime, and began to massage Leo's calves. The muscles were rock hard. The lack of oxygen and hydration was causing the red blood cells to sickle, locking together like jagged puzzle pieces in his son's veins, starving the tissues of oxygen. It was agony. "I'm here, Leo. I'm rubbing them." "Deep breaths," David whispered, sweat dripping from his own nose onto the carpet. At the front of the plane, the cockpit door opened. The first officer, a young man named Jenkins, poked his head out. He looked at Patricia. "What's going on back here? Tower says we have police at the jet bridge," Jenkins asked, looking annoyed. "Unruly passenger, row 12. Patricia said loudly, smoothing her skirt. "He threatened me, refused to remain seated. I followed Protocol Jenkins. We can't fly with a security risk." Jenkins frowned. He glanced down the long tube of the fuselage. He didn't see a terrorist. He saw a man kneeling on the floor, tending to a child. "Is that him?" "He's manipulative," Patricia hissed. "He's using the kid as a prop. Just let the cops handle it so we can get in the air. I'm already over time." The heavy cabin door groaned and popped open. The jet bridge, humid air rushed in, clashing with the stale cabin air. 2 police officers from the Port Authority stepped onto the plane. They were big men wearing tactical vests, their hands resting near their belts. "Who's the problem?" the lead officer asked. His name tag read Officer Williams. Patricia stepped forward, putting on her best distressed victim face. "Row 12. Officer, the man in the grey polo. He was screaming at me, lunging toward the galley. I felt unsafe." Officer Williams nodded grimly. "All right, folks, stay in your seats," he announced to the cabin. He began to walk down the aisle, his partner behind him. The atmosphere in the plane was electric with tension. Passengers craned their necks. Some pulled out phones to record. When Williams reached row 12, he saw David. David didn't look up. He was still massaging Leo's legs. "Sir," Officer Williams said, his voice booming. "I need you to step out into the aisle and put your hands where I can see them." David stopped rubbing. He looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, but his expression was terrifyingly calm. He slowly raised his hands, palms open. "Officer," David said, his voice steady. "My son is in a medical emergency. I asked for water. She refused. That is the extent of my crime." "He's lying," Patricia shouted from row 1. "He was aggressive. He tried to storm the cockpit." A murmur went through the plane. That was a lie, and everyone knew it. He didn't storm anything. Mrs. Higgins in 12C suddenly snapped her frailty, vanishing in a burst of outrage. "He asked for water for his boy. That stewardess is a witch." "Ma'am, stay back," the second officer warned. Officer Williams looked at David, then at Leo. He saw the tears streaming down the boy's face. He saw the twisted grimace of pain. Williams was a father, too. He hesitated. "Sir, you need to come with us off the plane. We can sort this out on the jet bridge." Williams said, his tone softening slightly but still firm. "We can't have you on board. I'm not leaving my son," David said. "And he can't walk. He's in crisis. We need paramedics, not police. If you don't move, I will have to forcibly remove you," Williams said, reaching for his handcuffs. "Don't make this harder." David looked at the handcuffs. Then he looked at his phone, which was sitting on the tray table. The screen lit up. A single notification. "Bob, execute." David looked Officer Williams in the eye. "Officer, before you arrest me, I suggest you wait exactly 30 seconds. "Excuse me." Williams blinked. 30 seconds, David repeated. "Because the man who runs this airline is currently speaking to the captain. And if you drag me off this plane, you're going to be explaining to the police commissioner why you arrested a whistleblower in the middle of a corporate intervention." "Is he threatening us now?" Patricia shrieked from the front. "Officer, get him off!" Williams reached for David's arm. Suddenly, the plane's intercom system chimed. It wasn't the usual soft ding-dong. It was a triple chime, the emergency alert signal from the cockpit. Ding, ding, ding. "Flight attendants stand by for all call." The captain's voice boomed over the speakers, but the voice sounded shaken, confused. Then the cockpit door didn't just open. It was thrown open. Captain Anderson, a veteran pilot with silver hair and 4 stripes on his shoulder, stepped out of the flight deck. He wasn't wearing his hat. He looked pale. He held the satellite phone handset in one hand. "Officer," Captain Anderson shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "Officer, stop. Do not touch that passenger." The entire cabin went dead silent. Even Leo stopped crying for a second, shocked by the volume. Patricia's jaw dropped. "Captain, he's the security threat. We need him "Quiet," Anderson barked at her, snapping his head toward Patricia with a ferocity that made her recoil. "Not one word, Patricia. Not one single word." Anderson walked down the aisle, ignoring the stunned passengers. He walked right up to row 12. He looked at Officer Williams. "Officer, I am the pilot in command of this vessel," Anderson said, breathing heavily. "I am rescinding the removal request. This man is to stay exactly where he is. Captain, your flight attendant called it in as a level 2 threat," Williams said, confused, his hand hovering over the cuffs. "She said assault." "She lied," Anderson said. The words hung in the air like sonki. He turned to David. The captain, a man who usually commanded the respect of hundreds, looked at David with a mix of awe and terror. "Mr. Carter?" Anderson asked. "Yes," David said calmly. I have Director Sullivan on the line," Anderson said, holding out the satellite phone like it was a holy relic. "He wants to speak to you, and he wants me to put it on the speaker." David took the phone. He didn't smile. He pressed the speaker button. "Bob," David said. The voice that came out of the phone was clear, deep, and amplified by the silence of the cabin. "David." Bob Sullivan's voice rang out. "Is Leo okay?" "He's in pain, Bob. Bad pain. We've been here 2 hours." "I know. I see the logs," Bob said. His voice shifted, becoming colder, harder. "Captain Anderson." "I'm here, sir," the captain replied quickly. "Captain, you are to ground this aircraft immediately. Cancel your takeoff clearance. Tell Tower you are code red for a medical emergency. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir. Already doing it." "Good. Now," Bob's voice seemed to darken. "Is the purser Patricia standing there?" Patricia was trembling. She had recognized the name. Sullivan. The god of operations. The man who could fire a pilot with a signature. She stepped forward, her hands shaking. I'm here, Mr. Sullivan," she squeaked. "Sir, you don't understand. The passenger was Patricia." Bob cut her off. The sound was like a gavel striking wood. "I am looking at your employment file right now. I see 3 previous complaints for refusal of service. I see a warning from 2022 for attitude. But none of that matters right now." Bob paused. The silence was suffocating. "You denied water to a child with a known medical condition during a ground hold. That is not just a policy violation. That is inhumane, and you tried to use the police as your personal goons to cover it up. Sir, You are relieved of duty effective immediately," Bob said. "You are no longer a crew member on this flight. You are a passenger. And since you are a passenger, and this is a full flight, you don't have a seat. You will grab your bags and you will vacate my aircraft. Now." The silence that followed Bob Sullivan's decree was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually only happens in a courtroom after a guilty verdict. Patricia stood frozen in the aisle. Her face had drained of all color, leaving her makeup looking stark and garish like a clown's mask. "Did you hear me?" Bob's voice crackled through the satellite phone David was still holding. "Captain Anderson, escort her off. If she refuses, ask Officer Williams to assist. I believe she is now trespassing." Captain Anderson turned to Patricia. His face was hard. He had been flying for 30 years, and he knew that a toxic flight attendant could ruin a crew, but he had never seen justice delivered this swiftly from the very top. "Patricia," Anderson said quietly, "get your bag." But, how will you do the service?" she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. Not tears of remorse, but tears of humiliation. "You're understaffed." "We'll manage," Anderson said. "Go." She looked around the cabin, searching for an ally. She looked at Sarah, the junior flight attendant. Sarah looked down at her shoes. She looked at the passengers. A slow clap started from row 15. Then row 16 joined in. Within 10 seconds, half the plane was applauding. It wasn't a raucous cheer. It was a slow, rhythmic clapping of validation. Patricia let out a sob, grabbed her purse from the galley, and practically ran past Officer Williams, who stepped aside to let her pass. He looked back at David and gave a small, respectful nod. He knew power when he saw it. "Officer, thank you for your patience," Bob's voice said over the phone. "You can file your report directly to my office. We will provide full CCTV footage from the galley to prove Mr. Carter's innocence." "Understood, sir," Williams said. He tipped his cap to David. "Hope your boy feels better." The police left. The door closed. "Captain," Bob said, "is Patricia off?" "Yes, sir. She is off the jet bridge." "Good. Now initiate Protocol Blue. I want every bottle of water on that plane distributed immediately. I don't care if it's first-class water. I don't care if it's intended for the return leg. Give it all out. Start with row 12. "Copy that," Anderson said. The call ended. Captain Anderson looked at David. "Mr. Carter, I apologize. I had no idea what was happening back here. The cockpit door is soundproofed. We rely on the cabin crew to be our eyes." "I know, Captain," David said, his adrenaline fading, leaving him exhausted. "Just the water. Please." Anderson didn't wait for the junior attendant. He ran to the first-class galley himself. He came back 10 seconds later with 2 large, cold 1.5-liter bottles of Evian and a bag of ice. David cracked the seal. The sound of the plastic ring snapping was the best sound he had ever heard. He poured the water into a cup, his hands shaking, and held it to Leo's lips. "Drink, buddy. Slow sips," David whispered. Leo drank. He drank greedily, the cool liquid soothing his parched throat. David held the cold bottle against Leo's overheating neck. He made an ice pack with a bath bag and placed it on Leo's arm. Sarah, Captain Anderson barked to the remaining flight attendant. Get the carts out. Free service. Everything. Snacks, sodas, juice. If anyone wants a refund on their ticket, tell them to email Sullivan. Just make these people happy. Sarah nodded vigorously. Yes, Captain. As the water flowed into Leo's system, rehydrating the cells, helping them return to their round shape and unclog the vessels, his grimace began to soften. The sharp, stabbing pain began to dull into a throb, and then an ache. Is the bad lady gone? Leo whispered, wiping his mouth. Yeah, Leo. David smiled, kissing his son's forehead. The bad lady is gone. She's grounded. David looked up. Captain Anderson was still standing there. Mr. Carter, we missed our slot, Anderson said. We have to refuel and get a new flight plan. It's going to be another hour before we take off, but... He lowered his voice. I can't have you sitting here in economy. Not after this. David shook his head. I'm not leaving, Leo. Bring him, Anderson said. Row 1 and 2 in first class are empty. The AC is stronger up there, and the seats lay flat. He can sleep. David looked at the cramped economy seat, then at Leo's exhausted face. Okay. As David picked up Leo in his arms to carry him to the front, the cabin erupted again. But this time it wasn't polite clapping. It was a cheer. Way to go, Dad, someone shouted. Take care of him, Mrs. Higgins called out. David walked down the aisle, carrying his son past the empty seat, where Patricia had sat, past the galley, where she had denied them water, and into the wide, plush leather seats of first class. He laid Leo down. Sarah immediately brought a blanket and another bottle of water. Thank you, David said. No. Sarah set her eyes wide. Thank you. She's been difficult for a long time. You just saved the rest of us from her. David sank into the seat next to Leo. He picked up his phone. He sent one last text to Bob. David. He's drinking. We're in first class. Thank you, brother. Bob. Don't thank me yet. When you land, check the news. I didn't just fire her, David. I made sure everyone knows why. David frowned. Check the news. The plane finally pushed back from the gate, the air conditioning blasting ice-cold relief. But as they taxied to the runway, David had no idea that while he was in the air, the story of Flight 402 was about to explode on the ground. A passenger in row 14 had recorded the entire interaction with Patricia and the captain's apology. By the time they landed, the video titled Sickle Cell Dad versus Evil Flight Attendant would have 3 million views, and the airline's stock was about to take a wild ride. But that wasn't the end, because Patricia wasn't the type of woman to go quietly. She was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. She was going to sue. And that was when the real war would begin. When Flight 402 finally touched down at LaGuardia Airport, the sun had already set, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the runway. Inside the first-class cabin, Leo was sleeping soundly, his small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that David hadn't seen in hours. The crisis had passed. The fluids had done their job. David, however, was wide awake. As the plane taxied to the gate, the fasten seatbelt sign chimed off. Immediately, a cacophony of beeps, whistles, and ringtones erupted from the economy cabin behind him. It sounded louder than usual, more urgent. David turned his phone off airplane mode. It didn't just vibrate, it convulsed. 74 text messages, 20 missed calls. emails flooding his inbox faster than he could read the subject lines. "Dude, is that you on Twitter?" "OMG, David. I just saw the video on TikTok. Bro, you're trending. Water for Leo is #1 worldwide." David felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He clicked on a link sent by his sister. It opened a video on a popular news aggregation site. The view count was staggering 4.2 million views in 3 hours. The video was shaky, filmed vertically from across the aisle in row 14. It showed the back of David's head, but it clearly showed Patricia's face. The audio was crystal clear. "Do you want a medical emergency on your hands?" David's voice in the video sounded desperate. "Don't threaten me," Patricia's voice sneered. "I've been flying for 20 years. Sit. Down." Then the video cut to the arrival of the police, the tension, and finally the explosive entrance of Captain Anderson and the public firing of Patricia. The caption read, "Power-tripping flight attendant denies dying kid water, gets instant karma from the CEO." David looked up as the jet bridge connected. He wasn't just a dad anymore. He was a viral sensation. "Mr. Carter," Sarah, the junior flight attendant, whispered. She looked nervous. "There are a lot of cameras outside the gate. The ground crew told us. Do you want us to escort you out a back way?" David looked at Leo, who was rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "No," David said, his jaw tightening. "We didn't do anything wrong. We're walking out the front." But David underestimated the storm. As they stepped into the terminal, the flashbulbs were blinding. Reporters were shouting questions. "Mr. Carter, did you threaten the crew? Is it true you know the CEO? How is your son?" David shielded Leo's face with his jacket and pushed through the throng, guided by airport security. He didn't speak. He just wanted to get home. But while David remained silent, Patricia did not. By the next morning, the narrative had begun to twist. Patricia had not gone home to hide in shame. She had gone straight to a crisis PR firm. David sat in his living room, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hand, watching the television. The program was The Morning View, a national talk show with millions of viewers. Sitting on the couch, looking fragile and dressed in a soft, modest cardigan that made her look like a harmless grandmother, was Patricia. Next to her sat a man in a sharp, grey suit, Richard Sterling, a lawyer known for taking on high-profile, wrongful termination cases. "Patricia," the host asked softly, "tell us your side. The video makes you look... well, it looks bad." Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "The video... it's edited," she sniffed. "It doesn't show what happened before. That man, Mr. Carter, he was belligerent from the moment he boarded. He smelled of alcohol. He was screaming at me, getting in my face. I was terrified. I was just trying to protect the cockpit." David stood up and threw his coffee mug across the room. It shattered against the wall, leaving a brown stain on the white paint. "Liar!" he shouted at the screen. "I don't even drink," on the TV. Patricia continued gaining confidence. "I followed protocol. The seatbelt sign was on. If I had gotten up, I could have been injured. And he used his son. That poor boy. He used him as a prop to try and get free service. And then he used his connections. He called his rich friend, and they humiliated me. They threw me off the plane like a criminal. I've given 20 years of my life to Skyway, and this is how they thank me." Richard Sterling leaned into the microphone. "We are filing a lawsuit today against Skyway Airlines and Mr. David Carter personally. We are suing for wrongful termination, defamation of character, and emotional distress. We are seeking $20 million in damages. This is about the rights of workers against the elite." The host nodded sympathetically. "Stay strong, Patricia." David stared at the screen, his chest heaving. The comments on social media were already turning. Wait, he was drunk. That changes everything. Typical elite calling the manager to fire a working woman. She was just following safety rules, justice for Patricia. The phone rang. It was Bob. "Did you see it?" Bob asked. His voice was low, dangerous. "She's lying, Bob. She's lying about everything. She said I was drunk. She said I threatened her." "I know," Bob said. "She's trying to win the court of public opinion before we even get to a judge. She thinks that if she paints herself as the victim of a corporate bully and an angry black man, we'll settle just to make it go away." "Are you going to settle?" David asked, fear creeping into his voice. "Bob, I can't afford a lawyer like Sterling. If she sues me—" "David," Bob interrupted, "listen to me closely. We are not settling. We are not paying her a dime. In fact, I'm glad she went on TV. I'm glad she lied." "Why?" "Because," Bob said, and David could practically hear the wolfish grin through the phone. "She just waived her right to privacy, and she just committed slander on a national broadcast. She wants a war. She has no idea what she just walked into. Get a suit, David. You're coming to Dallas. We're going to end this." The conference room at Skyway Airlines headquarters in Dallas was colloquially known as the War Room. It was a glass-walled fortress overlooking the airfield where massive jets took off and landed in a synchronized ballet of commerce. Inside the atmosphere was anything but peaceful. David sat at one end of a mahogany table long enough to land a Cessna on. Next to him was Elena Vance, Skyway's general counsel, a woman who didn't walk, she glided, and whose smile was said to be the last thing opposing lawyers saw before their careers died. Across the table sat Patricia and Richard Sterling. It was a deposition, a pre-trial fact-finding meeting. But Sterling was treating it like a victory lap. He had brought cameras to the lobby, though they were barred from the room, and had given a press conference on the steps of the building. "Mr. Carter." Sterling began leaning back in his chair, tapping a gold pen against his notepad. "Let's be honest. You were frustrated. It was hot. You wanted special treatment. And when my client, a veteran of the skies, told you no, for safety reasons you snapped. Isn't that right?" "No," David said, his voice steady. "My son was dying. I asked for water." "Dying." Sterling chuckled dryly. "That's a bit dramatic, isn't it? Sickle cell is a chronic condition, sure. But dying in 20 minutes. You clearly don't know the medicine," David said. His hands clenched under the table. "Dehydration triggers a crisis. A crisis causes organ damage. Organ damage kills, yes. Dying." "And the alcohol," Sterling pressed. "We have witnesses who say you smelled of bourbon." "Name them," Elena Vance cut in. Her voice was sharp as a scalpel. "Name one witness, Mr. Sterling. Because we have the toxicology report from the medical exam Mr. Carter voluntarily took 2 hours after landing. Blood alcohol level 0.2. So either he has a magic liver, or your witnesses don't exist." Sterling waved a hand dismissively. "We'll get to that. The point is your CEO, Mr. Sullivan, fired my client without due process. He humiliated her publicly. She has PTSD. She can't sleep. She can't work." Patricia sniffled on cue. She looked terrible bags under her eyes. hair messy. It was a perfect performance. "We are willing to make this go away," Sterling said, sliding a paper across the table. "Reinstatement of her job, a public apology from Mr. Carter and Mr. Sullivan, and $5 million in damages." Bob Sullivan, who had been standing by the window looking out at the planes, finally turned around. He walked slowly to the table. He didn't sit. He loomed. "5 million," Bob repeated. "It's a fair number for a destroyed reputation," Sterling said. Bob reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small silver USB drive. He placed it gently on the table. "Mr. Sterling," Bob said, "do you know what Protocol Blue entails? It's not just about giving out water. It's a full audit. When Patricia forced the captain to call the police, she triggered an automatic preservation of all data from that aircraft, including the galley cam." Patricia froze. "There are no cameras in the galley," she said quickly. "The Union blocked them in 2018. "The Union blocked video surveillance of crew breaks," Bob corrected. "But for security purposes, post 9/11, every commercial airliner has a black box audio recorder in the cockpit. What you might not know, Patricia, is that the interphone system, the phone you use to call the captain, records audio from the moment you lift the receiver until you hang it up. And it records the ambient noise in the galley for 30 seconds after you hang up, to catch hijackers planning their next move." Bob tapped the USB drive. "We have the audio, Patricia. Not just of you calling the police, but of what you said to your colleague Sarah immediately after." Sterling looked at his client. Patricia's face had gone the color of old milk. What is on that tape?" Sterling asked, his confidence wavering. "Would you like to hear it?" Eleanor Vance asked, already plugging the drive into a laptop. "No, Patricia started to say. "Play it," Bob commanded. The audio filled the room. It was crisp and undeniable. Sound of a phone hanging up. Patricia's voice. "There. Now nobody is going anywhere until you and your brat are escorted off. Are you happy?" Sound of footsteps. Patricia's voice to Sarah. "Can you believe that guy? Medical condition. Please. They always use that excuse. I'm going to make sure he's banned. The police will be here in 10 minutes. I hope they drag him out." Sarah's voice. "But Pat, the kid looked really sick." Patricia's voice. "Who cares? It's probably fake. Besides, I don't like his type. Entitled. Thinking they own the plane just because they bought a ticket. Let him rot." The silence in the room was heavier than lead. "I don't like his type," Bob repeated the words from the recording. "Tell me, Mr. Sterling, in a court of law, how does a jury interpret his type coming from a white woman refusing water to a black child?" Sterling was pale. He began to pack his papers. We might need a recess to discuss this evidence." "Sit down," Bob barked. "I'm not done." Bob opened a file folder. "When you sued us, Patricia, you opened the door to discovery. You claimed you had an exemplary record. So we looked. We dug into the archives, the complaints that were resolved by middle management." Bob tossed a stack of papers onto the table. They fanned out. 2019, a complaint from an elderly Hispanic woman. You refused to help her with her bag. She fell and broke her wrist. You claimed she tripped. 2021. A complaint from a Muslim family. You moved them to the back of the plane for weight balance, despite the front being empty. 2023. 3 separate complaints of you refusing water or blankets to passengers of color. Bob leaned in his face, inches from hers. You are not a victim, Patricia. You are a predator. You have been using your badge to bully vulnerable people for a decade, and you've been getting away with it because people were too scared or too busy to fight back. But you picked the wrong family this time. Patricia was shaking. Tears were streaming down her face, real ones this time. She looked at her lawyer. Do something. Sterling looked at the evidence. He looked at Bob Sullivan. He realized he was standing on the deck of a sinking ship. He closed his briefcase. My client, Sterling said, his voice tight, is willing to drop the lawsuit. Drop it? Bob laughed, a cold, hard laugh. Oh no. You don't get to just walk away. You went on national television and called this man a drunk and a liar. You destroyed his peace. You traumatized his son. What do you want? Sterling asked. Bob looked at David. David, it's your call. David looked at Patricia. He remembered Leo crying in the seat. He remembered the pain in his son's eyes. He remembered the humiliation of the police coming for him. I want her to go back on the Morning View, David said. I want her to sit in that same chair, and I want her to read a statement that we write, admitting everything, admitting she lied, admitting she profiled us, and apologizing to Leo by name. That's career suicide, Sterling protested. She'll never work again. She'll never work again anyway, Eleanor Vance said. We are countersuing for fraud and breach of contract. We will bankrupt her unless she does the interview. Patricia sobbed into her hands. I can't do that. Then we release the audio to the press today, Bob said, and we release the file of complaints. And then I call the district attorney and ask if filing a false police report about a threat on an aircraft constitutes a felony. Oh wait, I know it does. It's up to 5 years in prison. Patricia looked up. Her eyes were wide with terror. Prison. The interview, Patricia, David said softly. Or the cell. She nodded, a slow, defeated nod. I'll do it. The studio lights of the Morning View were bright, hot, and unforgiving. Just 48 hours ago, Patricia had sat in this exact spot, playing the role of the victim, weeping crocodile tears for a sympathetic audience. Today the atmosphere was different. It was cold. It was clinical. David didn't go to the studio. He sat in his living room with Leo, who was happily playing a video game, oblivious to the fact that his father was about to witness a public execution of a reputation. On the screen, the host, Diane, looked serious. Welcome back. On Tuesday, we heard a harrowing story from former flight attendant Patricia regarding an incident on Skyway Flight 402. Today, Patricia has asked to return to clarify her statements. Patricia. The camera zoomed in. Patricia looked 10 years older than she had 2 days ago. She wasn't wearing the soft cardigan. She wore a plain black suit. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, trembling visibly. She looked down at a sheet of paper on her lap, the paper David and Elena Vance had written. Patricia's voice cracked. She cleared her throat. I am here to correct the record. She looked into the camera. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. On Tuesday, I told this audience that Mr. David Carter was aggressive, intoxicated, and threatening. That was a lie. A collective gasp seemed to ripple through the studio audience, though they remained silent. Mr. Carter was sober. He was polite. He was a father pleading for help for his sick child. Patricia continued, reading the words that tasted like ash in her mouth. I denied his 10-year-old son Leo water, not because of safety regulations, but because I was angry and impatient. When Mr. Carter persisted, I called the police and filed a false report to punish him for questioning my authority. She paused. This was the part she had fought against in the boardroom, but the threat of prison had been too real. I judged Mr. Carter and his son based on their appearance. I assumed the worst of them because of my own biases. I have a history of this behavior which Skyway Airlines has now uncovered. I am not a victim. I was the aggressor. I apologize to David. I apologize to Skyway. And most importantly, I apologize to Leo. I am sorry for the pain I caused you. Silence. The host. Diane didn't offer comfort this time. She leaned in, her eyes hard. Patricia, you tried to ruin a man's life to cover up your mistake. Why should anyone believe you now? Patricia looked up, her eyes hollow. They shouldn't, she whispered. I don't deserve it. The feed cut to commercial. David picked up the remote and turned off the TV. He let out a long, deep breath he felt he had been holding for 3 days. It was over. The truth was out. The internet would do the rest. The forums that had supported her would turn on her within the hour. Her career in aviation, and likely in any public-facing role, was finished. Dad? Leo asked, pausing his game. Did we win? David looked at his son. Leo's eyes were bright, his skin clear, the pain crisis completely gone. Yeah, buddy. David smiled, ruffling Leo's hair. We won. But not just us. The phone buzzed. It was a text from Bob. Bob. It's done. Also check your email. We just launched Protocol Leo. David opened his email. It was a company-wide memo from Skyway Airlines forwarded to him. Subject new policy. Protocol. Leo. Effective immediately. Any passenger identifying a medical distress, particularly regarding hydration or temperature regulation, is to be granted immediate access to resources, regardless of flight status or seatbelt signs. Crew members are authorized to break ground protocol to preserve life. Failure to comply is grounds for immediate termination. David stared at the screen, tears pricking his eyes. It wasn't just about the water anymore. It was a legacy. Because of one bad day and one brave text, thousands of people with invisible illnesses, sickle cell, diabetes, POTS, would be safer in the sky. He texted Bob back. Thank you. Bob's reply came instantly. Don't thank me. You're the one who stood up. David put the phone down. He went to the kitchen, poured a large glass of cold water and drank it. It tasted like victory. In the end, Patricia thought she held all the cards. She had the uniform, the authority, and the rules. But she forgot the most important rule of all humanity. Costs nothing, but the price of cruelty is everything. She lost her job, her reputation, and her dignity because she refused to show a little kindness to a child in pain. David and Leo didn't just survive that flight. They changed the industry. Today, Protocol Leo ensures that no one else has to suffer in silence on the tarmac. What would you have done if you were in David's shoes? Would you have sat down, or would you have stood up? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story about justice served cold. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.